Hello, this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So, this episode I'm calling The U.S. Supreme Court Turns Supreme Junta in Long-Term Republican Plan. So, this is kind of a reframing and summary episode of the current series of opinions and rulings of the Supreme Court over the last couple weeks, and but also a reflection on the nature of the sort of reactionary, you could say reactionary mind, or the right-wing mind, the now pretty much fascist mind on the right wing in the United States, on the quote-unquote conservatives in the United States. And they, for a long time, have fastened on the Supreme Court and the court systems in general as an institution and a bridgehead into their vision of society. And some of it has to do with their perception in the 1950s and 60s that the Supreme Court had turned against them, that with things like Brown versus Board of Education, and other rulings, and Roe v. Wade, obviously, that that the courts had sort of were quote unquote legislating from the bench, or and that they would that the true conservative court would not be legislating from the bench. Now, this turned out to be pure projection. It's simply a struggle for power, okay, and that by the right wing, and unfortunately, the liberal left, such as it was in the last 50, 60 years or longer, had bought into this idea of the court or Supreme Court as some kind of neutral arbiter and a sort of a kind of a priesthood of the law. And I think there's really little basis for that idea. For one, I mean, and this is maybe idealistic on my part, I think we don't have a sufficient theory of law overall, theory of what laws are and what they do in society and so forth and so on. What's the nature of the law? And I mean, that's something that I'm not a lawyer, and so I don't, nor am I in any shape a legal theorist, but I have some intuitions about, what might be a more rigorous way to think about laws and lawmaking. But anyway, in the absence of such a, in my opinion, rigorous theory, it's become a series of political games to, for instance, the idea of originalism, that the idea that you could interpret the Constitution as if it were being written today, but written 300, 200 years ago. In other words, as if you could divine the intent of the founders, and that intent was immutable and just and right and correct for the current society, and that's been the sort of the cover story for the right wing grab for power through the court system. And so, and as I think his name was Moshe Temkin. I think I'll try to find a link to a tweet that he put out. I think it was today, today being June 30th of 2022. That he said that people are just discovering now, or they're just that justices or Supreme Court justices are just people who rule according to their own political ideology, and the idea of therefore this myth of this sort of neutral judicial temperament, or this kind of this ability, that this idea that the judges sort of hovered above politics is bunk. And so I think that there's probably something in there that there is a judicial role that it could be above politics, but mostly in the way our system is structured and the way the legal architecture of the teaching of the law, the teaching of how the sort of the you could say unscientificness or the lack of rigor in legal theories overall, that they become partisan, basically favored by one partisan group or another, that you just simply have your theory, right-wing legal theory and left-wing legal theory, that that this indicates a fundamental fragility in the overall architecture. And this is something that you find in other social sciences. Let's say law is a social science, or it could be considered something based on social science, even though it doesn't call itself that. It probably could be categorized within them. And as someone who has been working in a couple different social sciences over the last 30 years or so, psychology and economics as a sort of a commentator and not as a PhD economist, but anyway, that there is such room for play or tolerances within the architecture of legal theory, or any, for instance, any social science theory, that political and personal interests trump, I'm sorry for the metaphor, but outweigh sort of some kind of factual, beyond self, objective reality, objective, and that, I mean, that's I think that there may be a possibility to do that, to have a better sense of what the law would be in some future society. But in our current society, it's a struggle between parties, veiled as a struggle about neutral laws or old writings in the old writing being the Constitution, and how flexible those old writings are, and whether we have the power and not only the power but the justification by various other, I think, by ethics. I think ethical justification is very important. Ethics, I think, is behind the law, or is more august or higher up than the law, in the sense of you want the law to conform to our ethics as a society, our macro ethics. But anyway, people have different views of what's ethical, and therefore they've constructed the law in different ways and created different theories about the law. So anyway, this is a long preamble to my title, in that the Supreme Court, now with a 6-3 conservative majority, can now dictate its own political wishes, using the veil of being these neutral or trans-historical commentators upon current events and upon the disputes between different groups in society, and that they can essentially legislate their wishes behind this veil. Okay, and some of that, and people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others, and she's one of the leaders now of the movement. Mondaire Jones has been also though he's unfortunately now embroiled in some campaigning to maintain himself, to remain in Congress, because he was his seat has been disputed due to the new redistricting in New York. So anyway, but there are some progressive commentators who are saying that we need to start conforming in a way to the highest standard of the Constitution, being checks and balances, that the Supreme Court has outrun the checks and balances of the executive and legislative branches, and which is very much true, that they and that in a way conservatives, I think, in their intuitive sense of where power could be exerted and where they could use an authoritarian hierarchical view of society and of protecting property interests, protecting established social groups that are considered to be higher status or older or whatever it is, or or more well established or more well ensconced in society overall. You could protect and shore up their power through the judiciary, and so and they intuit this in part because I think, and this gets into a way to psychology, that the right wing, the conservative mind, or the right wing mind, is very much focused on wills, on the exertion of their will, especially the will of a better sort of people, or a higher level of people, or the highest level. In 400 or 500 years ago, it was the king or the aristocracy. But anyway, evolving from there to a imagined aristocracy of rich people or of white people or of men, so forth and so on, over women, and so that they would and they see constant threats to that hierarchy, and they through their own need for control and for a sense of being above other people, that they have fastened on the judiciary as a way to exert that, using, of course, this idea in the 50s and 60s that somehow the judiciary had become liberal and it was legislating. So they decided in some sense, no, now we're going to legislate. And there was no contrary movement on the left saying, hey, wait a minute, you're trying to legislate from the bench, so we're trying to legislate. Until now we're realizing that, they're legislating from the bench. And so I'm calling this a supreme junta. And I'm doing this in a way that they have become a supreme junta in our society without the actions of the executive and legislative branches to check them, to impeach those that have violated the law, because there are Supreme Court justices that have violated law. They perjured themselves. They have not disclosed political contributions to their campaigns or to their interests, to their various personal interests. And so, and they have not, like in the case of Clarence Thomas, they have protected their own spouse from, or they have put themselves in a position where they could likely protect their own spouse from prosecution for her unlawful activities, or likely unlawful activities. So anyway, the installing, and this is something that Ocasio-Cortez has very articulately expressed in, I think it was on Stephen Colbert, in Late Night Show, that really the checks and balance, and there are other people who are talking about the similar thing, that there needs to be a series of checks and balances installed on the court, and to at least fulfill the vision even of the Constitution, the basic architecture of U.S. government. And right now, the right has run away from that. Okay, so even if they claim to be originalists, you can say, well, we're more originalist if we rein in the Supreme Court. So, but right now they are acting as a junta, and I'm using the word junta very advisedly, because I think Americans tend to, and the American discourse tends to think of in exceptionalistic terms. Americans tend to exempt themselves from a comparison with other countries. But really, we have here, they're not a military junta, but they're a legal junta, that the Supreme Court, that can now dictate policy and can really restructure government. For instance, the Chevron deference that they're attacking, the EPA ruling, they're essentially, according to their own druthers, restructuring U.S. society, anti-sodomy laws, or abortion laws legalizing abortion or prohibiting the prohibition of abortion by states, and so forth and so on. They are simply just legislating according to their own personal beliefs. And so behind the veil, of course, of and I agree that some of these there that in a way the liberal left or the center liberal left has been sleeping on some of these institutions. They've relied on these old decisions from the 50s and 60s and 70s to protect institutions that should be protected simply by law, by actually passing laws in Congress and the president signing them. So this is a opportunity, unfortunately, in a very, very dark time, in a way that where the forces of good, or the forces that might be good, are split within themselves, have leadership that is questionable, or even I would say a fifth column. Some you might say in terms of like Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, they seem to be in some sense operating for the other side at times when they should be really partisans of democracy, small d democracy, also their own party, more than protecting the wild neo-fascist Republicans, or just trying to reform the Republicans from the other side of the aisle. So, but anyway, this is a junta in the form of, for instance, the Brazilian junta in the 1960s and 70s, the Greek junta in the 60s and 70s. So, in other words, various juntas in Latin America at various times. So, recognizing that at times high officials have gotten together of government, have gotten together and created a council or whatever it is that became a military, or mostly military instance that cemented an oligarchy, or that worked for an oligarchy that was the behind the scenes. The richest families created were an oligarchy which the junta was protecting. But anyway, similarly, we have a junta here with a Supreme Court, and we have a series of very quaint and American-sounding justifications for this junta, but it is a junta, and so it is a dictatorial instance that has no there's no check on it, and or there's no there people have not installed checks on them, or enough checks on them, and so and there needs to be simply the checks installed, and so this is a longer term program. The Congress could get cracking on it right now, but it seems as though the leadership of the would-be leadership of that movement is still indifferent to, or just, I'm talking mostly about Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer to some degree. They're all not fighters. They're weak leaders, and so we need strong leaders who are willing to assert that we need to update our institutions, and including this checks and balances of the Supreme Court, because right now the Supreme Court is on a run, and it's going to continue to push that, and we have a small minority of the U.S. that is cheering them on, or let's say 30% or so of the country that's cheering them on, and that unfortunately are now installing themselves as the basis of in the other institutions, the legislature and the presidency may install themselves as being the deciders, okay, about who gets into office, by basically undermining democracy, by the U.S. in some sense turning into a neo-fascist, minoritarian non-democracy very soon, and so which is in line with what the Supreme Junta is doing. So there's a very, very small window where some cracks in this junta could be created, and then potentially other instances could happen. And maybe, the extremity of what they're doing will affect the outcome in the election in November. So the Democrats will have a little more time to try to put some checks in on this run, this grab, the power grab. So, and I think, ultimately, I think there needs to be a fundamental embrace on the part of people who are on the left or liberal left or progressives, that they need to seek to have power and use power for the people, and they need to be transparent about it, but also say we are for power. Power is good. Having power is good if you are going to use it for good. And so, and that is something that has not been deeply embraced. There's a shying away from power. There's a modesty, whether false or just characterological modesty of people who are on the left in terms of not seizing the opportunity to gain power and then use power for good purposes. And that means to seize power for good purposes means you disclose what your purposes are. You disclose your plans, and you say, this is why I'm aspiring to power democratically, but when I get the democratically achieved power, that I'm going to use it to make it more easy for my ideas, and the people that are supporting the people, supporting what people need, that those ideas become realized in real policy and in institutions that function for people, that serve people. So there needs to be I think a psychological revolution, which is in some sense happening in a very, very marginal, in the way that people think about a good person having power and using power, not because they are a magical person, because they are a charismatic person, but because they have good ideas and they are transparent about what they're trying to do with that power. So, and that's something that I might need to return to in future episodes, because I'm just throwing it in there at the end of this longer episode. Anyway, I'm going to stop here, but please, in the comments, share your thoughts on the use of, among other things, the word junta to describe the Supreme Court, and also just in general to unveil our discourse of the Americanisms or the exceptionalism, let's say, with which we tend to view our society, our very old democracy, and that our very old system of government that needs lots of help, because it has a lot of holes in it, which people with bad intent have been using, including Donald Trump and others in the Republican Party and in this right-wing judicial movement, like the Federal Society, have been using that to dictate to a minority, dictate to the majority how they should live their lives. So anyway, I'm going to stop here. If you like the video, please like it. And also, if you're liking Politics 2100, please subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.